Hello, people. How are you feeling today? I'm Xinchen, a correspondent from CGTN. I've been covering economy and business stories for the past 6-7 years in Asia. I'm very delighted, and it's my great pleasure, honor to be here to moderate this session, Shaping the Future of Digital Payments. But first, let me introduce this handsome bunch of gentlemen. And we have Abdullah Aziz.
Talking about you guys.
Ala Flag, the Managing Director for Saudi Payments, Saudi Arabia. We have Mr. Bob Diamond, a legendary banker, and now founding partner and CEO of Atlas Merchants Capital. And I have Nanda Mir, the CEO of Network Global based in UAE. And we have Ang Moe, founder and CEO for 2C2B, a payment solution providers. And last but not least, Mr. Andrew Tor, the regional president for Visa's operations, especially in Central Europe, Middle East, and East Africa. So first, I want to share my experience. This is my first time in Saudi Arabia. I found it quite an easy transition for me because I was doing another business trip and never had any cash on me. I only had my Visa card, to be honest. But then I was okay with Uber and feeding myself. I found actually Saudi Arabia in Riyadh is quite open to using digital payments and newer technologies for paying things. And so let's start with Saudi Payments, because Saudi Payments is the payment structure provider here in Saudi Arabia. So Mr. Al-Falag, would you mind to sharing with us a little bit kind of back information about how digital payment has been developed here in Saudi Arabia?
Perfect. I'm happy that you had a very good experience. Thank you very much, Gerald, and good morning. Happy to be here at the Financial Sector Conference. I believe this is an important question because it gives an opportunity to shed some light on the remarkable journey for payments within the kingdom. The central bank has put down a strategy more than 30 years ago to establish payment systems. Built on that strategy, we have built our ATM and point of sale and e-commerce platform, MEDA, in the 90s, followed by the electronic bill presentment and payment SADAD in 2004. In 2018, we introduced our e-invoicing platform, ESAL. And last but not least, in February 2021, we have launched the Saria payment system, which is the instant payment system platform. All of these systems were built on principles. The most common principles that they should be secure, reliable, resilient, but we all know that. We also made sure through the central bank strategy for these systems to be built on, for them to be local schemes, local capabilities, in order to ensure innovation and growth for the future. But at the same time, introduce interoperability for the ability of connecting to our local and international partners. All of that resulted into major results and numbers. If we go back to 2017, when the financial sector development program was launched as part of Vision 2030, at that time we had 800 million transactions. Fast forward to 2022, we have closed the year with 8.2 billion transactions. So that's major growth, from 450 billion riyals to 1.8 trillion riyals. And in terms of acceptance, now at 2017, we had 350,000 point of sale terminals. In 2022, we have 1.5 million terminals. The most important thing is also that we deliver on our objectives. One of the most important of them is within the financial sector development program is a society that is less dependent on cash. Our target is 70% by 2025. We have achieved, according to the latest report issued by the central bank, 57%. One last point is the positive impact of the strong payment infrastructure here in the kingdom on the other programs within the Vision 2030. Take, for example, SADAD, the electronic presentment and payment platform. It is currently responsible for 99.9% of the government collections. So we believe that's a very strong step towards complete digitalization of payments.
I think this expansion of digital payments is seen not just here in Saudi Arabia and actually around the world, and especially here in Asia. I want to share a quick story about my experience with digital payments. Actually, my mom taught me how to shop online and how to use mobile apps to pay, because I was educating in the United States, and I came back to China in 2015, and where China has really boosting its development into like mobile payments or digital payments and e-commerce. And I want to ask, put the next question to on about this, what we are seeing right now in Asia, like why Asia somewhat has a faster development in terms of digital payments, and especially post-pandemic. Pandemic forced a lot of people to shop online and to be a little more confident with digital payments. And what's your take?
Sure. I mean, for e-commerce in Southeast Asia, it is a necessity for everybody. It's not just a luxury. So for instance, in Southeast Asia, we have 11 nations stitched together with different economic development, and out of which some of the geographical conditions in countries like Philippines, it has over 7,000 islands, where their only way to get their products and services is through e-commerce. With that, e-commerce has been growing over 30% year on year, and obviously pandemic has increased that growth even further. To facilitate that e-commerce, government also built their own domestic infrastructure. Following the lead of a country like Saudi Arabia, they have their own domestic infrastructure, real-time payment for their citizens. It became very useful during the pandemic because even when providing social security and support to these citizens, government is using national payment infrastructure to deliver the support people need very efficiently. And then people can use digital payment to transit. For 2C2P, we have been around for about 20 years to stitch all these payments together with over 200 different types of payment. And what we see in the past 5 years is that every country, from a very developed nation like Singapore to a developing nations like Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, they have started their own national payment linked to the national ID, linked to the mobile number of their citizen, so that their citizen can transact locally very efficiently, very similar to what Saudi Arabia has done about 30 years ago. And now these countries are establishing relationship between their own countries, sometimes bilateral relationship. Now Singapore is playing a very important role as a central hub to connect between these countries to facilitate interoperability. And that's what we are seeing. And with that growth in payment infrastructure, I'm sure e-commerce will continue to grow right after the pandemic. We don't see any slowing down. And we have a very healthy competition going on. Amazon is right now in Southeast Asia. We have e-commerce company from China playing a significant role. And because of this healthy competition, and I think e-commerce will continue to grow.
Competition is good for market to grow a little bit more. But what about UAE? And what's the situation right over there from Mr. Nandar Mir? What's your observation about mobile digital payments in Saudi's close neighbor?
Sure. So thanks for having me on the panel. The UAE, I think the transition is pretty much similar to what's happening here in Saudi Arabia. There's a massive secular shift from cash to digital payments. The infrastructure in the UAE, as you know, has been honed over many years and is pretty stable and well penetrated. A lot of penetration still to be done, not as penetrated as what I hear here in Saudi Arabia. I hear you can go pretty much to any establishment in the kingdom and pay electronically. And that's a dream for most markets, right? And you guys are very close to achieving your dream of ubiquity. But I think the main thing for digital payments to thrive is obviously the acceptance infrastructure. It's the ubiquity of acceptance that must be in place. And then there are several other factors. Consumer behavior takes time to change, and you have to work on it over a period of time. But to answer your question specifically, I'd say Andrew will probably have more accurate numbers for you, but I'd say it's a very strong double-digit growth. Our business is, and we have a pretty sizable market share in the UAE, so you could use us as a proxy for the kind of growth we're seeing there. And for the past 2 or 3 years that I've been involved with the business in the UAE, it's been growing in mid-30s, low 40s, year-on-year growth, just the shift from cash payments to electronic payments. And it's driven both by domestic payments, but also the UAE is a great destination for people coming from around the world. Yeah. So that's helping too.
Yeah, and actually, Mr. Naller also touched a quite interesting observations about the partnerships like between your firm and Visa or MasterCard, etc. For Andrew, thinking about this digital payment transition, and what's your take on Visa strategies to really kind of adapt in this modern day people paying stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, the first thing I would say is about 15% of the economy is now digital, so we need digital solutions, certainly. The industry's been over 60 years old, and, you talked about plastic before. We even back 60 years ago, our founder talked about dematerializing cards, and we're going to cloak it with the forms of the future, and now we see the forms of the future out there. So we've been working over the last number of decades to really increase the utility in our network and system. So we have been able to provide new value-added services. We've put tokens across the ecosystem, which allows cards to be digitalized. So you got virtual cards, and we've created new ways to move money more broadly within markets and across the globe, being able to do push payments as well. So move from any of our 4 billion cards to another card, also specifically to move to current accounts across the globe. And the results have been pretty outstanding. So Nandan was talking about some of the results, but if we look across the region that I cover, Central Europe, Middle East, and Africa, 2019, 65% of transactions on Visa cards were cash. In 3 short years, 2022, it's now 48%. So cash is disappearing. Payments have increasingly become digital. You're here in the kingdom, and in 2017, about 17% of contactless transactions were contactless. Now it's 96, 97%. And when you think about that, there's very often no longer a card involved in a contactless transaction. Someone's pulling out the phone. Same on e-commerce. We've seen a huge rise in e-commerce during the pandemic, both existing users and new users. And often someone is just being able to use their own mobile banking application to push provision their card, a virtual card or a virtual token, to merchants all over the world, so Netflix and others. So, we're really seeing digital economy transform and take hold, and we're working really hard to make sure that happens.
Definitely, and I think this actually the expansions in how digitalization is changing payments and how people shop benefits people. I love the environment of what we see today, but also I see it somewhat create digital divides for a lot of elder folks. They don't have a smartphone, or they don't know how to use applications, or they don't know what NFC is. What I see is there might be other investment opportunity created, right, from the waves of digital payments development. And what's your take on this, Mr. Bob Diamond?
I think what we're looking at is as many of the members have said, for us, for consumers, digital payments are quite advanced. For business-to-business payments, it's nowhere near as advanced. And so our most recent investment in Circle, which is U.S. digital coin, we do believe that the institutional market, where business-to-business transactions can be significantly faster and significantly less expensive without someone in the middle, a bank always being in the middle. And it's truly been fostered by the internet, but also very, very much fostered by blockchain technology, which allows that security without a bank or an insurance company or a card standing in the middle. So if we can envision a world where corporate treasurers, banking treasurers are moving money around digitally, it'll have a big, big impact on efficiency, inclusion, cost. And I think in my mind, the big difference between, say, the United States and China is that it's almost inconceivable that the digital version of the currency would be developed by anyone other than the central bank, and that's how it's moving forward. And in the U.S., we would expect it to be developed by the private sector. There's not much movement going on at the Fed. There's a lot of studies. And I think the history of the U.S. has really been the private sector developments and then high regulation. So whether it was the FedWire or SWIFT, these things weren't developed by the Fed. They were developed by the private sector and then adopted and regulated. So I think it's going to be pretty exciting over the next couple of years as we see these developments in the private sector get adopted by the regulators.
So there were definitely a lot of new infrastructure built or new scheme happen from like the government to boost private sectors to be a little bit more proactive, or versus like models like in China where the government, the central bank will take a bigger roles. But what about the future of digital payments? Right now, for a lot of regular people, they might just see it paying bills, or I don't need to take my wallets out. But are there any other areas that the digital payments can work or possible drive investment? For example, here in Saudi Arabia.
What we need to do is to create, and this is what we're doing right now, a level playing field for businesses to compete within the industry and be part of it. This helps in giving them access to it and decreases time to market. For example, in Saudi payments, we have more than 97 unique businesses connected to the local schemes here in the kingdom. This gave an opportunity for these businesses to flourish and grow. We saw the introduction and the growth of e-commerce, as Andrew said, and Ong said about the growth in NFC acceptance, where we reached 97% according to the latest study done between collaboration between Saudi Payments and Visa. We saw large acceptance of e-commerce moving from cash to digital, triple growth from 32 billion to 120 billion in e-commerce. We saw the birth of companies supporting B2B rails, B2B using Saudi Payments rails. And also we saw the barrier of point of sale entrance being lowered down by the introduction of many service providers to the industry. I believe that we were from the beginning at the forefront of innovation, and but at the same time we should be agile, flexible, open to the market, ready to accept change. The world of payments is a rapidly changing world with many services introduced very, very rapidly. We're looking into going beyond the scheme, introducing microservices to grow the ecosystem, value-added services, working with the central bank to understand the impact of CBDC on the payment systems, and also the open banking and how it will impact. So we're very excited for the future. It shows very promising opportunities. The most important point is to always be ready for that.
So definitely there's huge growth opportunities still ahead of us. But just as Mr. Diamond just said, like how digital currency or cryptocurrency somewhat can be a little bit more efficient in terms of, say, business operations costs or whatnot, and help the flow of transactions. What I found out, especially in China, because there are so many different payment providers, it can also be troublesome for e-commerce providers or business owners to link all those different channels to make it more efficient, because customers are craving for easier and faster transactions. And I was joking with Mr. Ong earlier, just the Alipay in China is one of the more prominent mobile payment provider in China. It's not just a payment device. It's not just a payment app. It also has these chat or social functions. If Mr. Ong asked me to bring him a cup of coffee, I no longer have to chase after him. Can you pay me back the $5? He can probably just message me, bring me the coffee, and then transfer me the money. So what do you see, Mr. Ong, as well as Mr. Nandar, the future applications in terms for consumers, the future for digital payments?
Sure. I mean, the transformation of the touch point is changing, the way we are making payment. Like Andrew was making the point earlier, we will no longer have a credit card number or a series of digits, not so very friendly, entering at the website or using a card and dipping a chip at the shop to make payment. We will be interacting with the RFID, excuse me, or we will be paying using our face recognition or store value of the card in advance so that we can make payment at the website. And in some country like India, they are using biometric to make payment. So the transformation of how we transact has been changing. The touch point has been changing. But yes, we are payment professionals and we want to talk about payment all day long, but customers are not doing e-commerce and eager to make payment. Customers are shopping to get their products. Payment is just something they have to do to get their product. We are in their way. So our job is to make sure we make their purchase as seamless as possible, as easy as possible. The day we can transact without being existing or without even knowing that we exist by the customer, it is the day we have successfully executed our payment service. So nowadays, most of the payment companies try to project their payment solutions or their logo in the way of transaction. I think this is changing in the near future because in the future, just by looking into the camera, you can complete the transaction. The customer don't need to know how this was encrypted or how this is authenticated behind the scene. That is our duty to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think you're hearing a common theme from all the panelists here. And as you rightly referenced, the role of technology in the secular shift from cash to digital payments cannot be underscored. And you've heard it from different perspectives. But essentially, going back to the point that Ong was making, that if you can make the payment almost invisible part of the transaction, and to a certain extent, the Alipays of the world have done that. The super apps do it. They make life convenient. They they're comprehensive in the range of services that they provide, and they make the payment transaction, if you may, a consequence of what's really happening in the app. It's not the reason you get in. You're not thinking in terms of Alipay, of course, is a brand by itself, but you're not thinking about, you don't wake up in the morning wanting to make payments. You want to live your life the way you want to live it, and then the payment just has to flow. So tech is one part. The other thing I'd say is, and we probably don't talk about it enough, is the cost of the transaction. Right? It's very important for both the merchant and for the consumer that cash is perceived as costless. We all know there's a cost of cash too, right? Yeah. And it's if you look at it from an economic perspective, especially on a macro basis, cash is very expensive. But on a micro transaction basis, it is perceived as being free. And again, I'd like to compliment the work that Saudi Payments, Sama, as well as Madha have done here, because you guys have kept a pretty good lid on the costs here. And I think that tsunami of the shift, the tectonic shift that you're seeing here, the lid that you put on the costs has a big role to play in that shift too. It's technology, of course, at its base, but it's also doing it at a very affordable cost.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Daman, where do you see this kind of how the future possibility of digital payments would play into the financial industry? And just based on these gentlemen's their answers, what's your observation or evaluation of the future expansion of digital payments?
So I think something interesting has happened with the onset of kind of crypto winter and lower valuations for tech and all that has happened in the last year or so, is it's provided an opportunity for the incumbent financial institutions, particularly in the U.S., from J.P. Morgan to community banks, have an opportunity to acquire, to invest in existing technology in areas like blockchain. And blockchain was developed very much outside of the traditional banking system. It's my view that 10 years from today, that will be the foundation of the technology of the big banks. Yeah. And I think what's exciting to me is with crypto winter, a number of things happen, but one of the things that's been most exciting is the ability for the incumbent traditional banks and financial institutions to find an opportunity to acquire some of these smaller companies where the innovation is really there and some of the technology. And I think it's going to help drive the transformation of what has traditionally been a very cumbersome, very expensive infrastructure. I'm sure you saw this many years ago at Visa when you had to kind of transform the technology to something that was more adaptable to the world today. I think banks are just beginning to go through this in the U.S., and I think it's going to be very exciting.
It's definitely we're seeing these huge shifts and changes in the banking industries. But again, for Visa, how do Visa stay prominent in the payment world? Especially, your business is all over the world, and people can find a Visa card anywhere on this planet. But how do you adapt or different strategies into different markets?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, we were talking about payments being a global business, and it is, but it's also local, right? Abdulaziz talked about the things they've done here as well. So we have to do both really well. I'll just touch on something Ong said around, biometric and facial payments. We did something last year in Qatar around the World Cup with Face ID to be able to pay. And that was actually really successful. Consumers liked it. It made it a super seamless and simple experience. It worked in that market because you already had a high degree of digitization, and the merchants there, and this merchant was willing to be able to accept it. There are still challenges, though, I do want to call out on biometrics because there are no global standards and they're not interoperable, which is a lesson that we all need to take, that it has to be that way to get consumer trust. On the innovation side, we invest globally, we make sure our network's ready globally, but then we work individually in each and every market. So we innovate at the center in our network, but we also innovate in each market. So we have Visa Everywhere initiatives where we work with local fintechs and partners. So we do a lot of work there. We have fintech fast tracks. And I'll say, in order to, and Nandan made a really good point about small and micro merchants, right? That's the last bastion of cash, really, because they're excluded. So we all have work to do there. And, we're going towards this future where we want to be able to see payments as simple and easy as sending a text message and as secure. And on the merchant side, they need to be able to use the devices they have today to be able to accept payments. So, we've done a lot of work around tap to phone or acceptance in the cloud where we're just driving software to merchants. And at the end of the day, though, that's only going to work when you have that digital distribution chain, when you have trust, when you have the trust of the consumers and the merchants and they see the benefits, access to capital, access to things like that. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. And we and the partners here work all along that spectrum to make sure it happens globally and in individual markets.
So absolutely. So what I see digital payments like as a younger generation, I definitely see as the development of digital payments, younger folks have a say how that we're going to feel more comfortable shopping or buying, and somewhat digital payments gives younger voices or the less fortunate people have a chance to be connected with the world or with a bigger ecosystem. I think we are running short on time. It's almost noon, and let's just wrap up this session and probably give a round of applause for our panelists, a very handsome bunch right here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.